Good morning, everyone. I want to start today with a question. How many of you, raise your hand, would consider software development a dangerous activity? Okay, not that many of you. Now, how many of you would consider an activity that potentially involves hostile or bad relationships, mental or physical stress, and something called a death march? How many of you would describe that as dangerous? Okay, a good number more. Now, what if I told you that software development had all those risks and even more? It probably wouldn't take me that long to convince you because many of you could probably relate in some way or another. In talking with developers from all over the world, what I found is that there are a lot of small risks in what we do. Whether it's poor working conditions, or horrendously managed projects, or even just abusive managers and bad teammates. There's a lot of tiny risks in what we do as our job. And so because of that, I say software engineering is dangerous, just not dangerous in the way you might expect it to be. Even when we have good salaries, nice offices, comfy jobs, basically, there's still a lot of risk in what we do. There is in every field across the world. But our field is focused on creativity, right? And problem solving, and really approaching unique and new challenges. And unfortunately, it's not so focused on how we interact with one another, how we take care of ourselves, and how we build our teams. And so this is a combination that easily and unfortunately leads us to a lot of stress, right? And it can lead to physical, mental illness, and burnout. We see people leave our industry all the time because of issues like these. And so we can't do it alone. We need a team, right? But not just any team. We need a team that is going to support us to take that dangerous environment we work in and turn it into a safe one. But what does that team look like? What kind of traits should we be looking for in our team and in ourselves? How do we build effective, successful teams? That's what I want to talk about this morning. And I think it's a great way to kick off this conference as we talk about a lot of the cutting-edge things that are happening in the CSS community. So my name is Trent Willis. Currently, I'm a senior UI engineer at Netflix. And I love my job. I think it's wonderful. I get a ton of freedom. I get to work on things that interest me. And most importantly, they give me free food. So what's not to like about that, right? But one of the primary reasons that I actually really, really enjoy the team that I work on is because it's what I would consider a safe team. And it's this relatively ambiguous idea of a safe team that I want us to talk about today. Because I would argue many of us don't actually work on a team like this. Now you might say, Trent, what are you talking about? It's not like I fear going to the office. Of course my team is safe. But that's not the type of safety that I'm actually referring to. I'm talking about safety in a more interpersonal sense, a sense that you can fully and completely engage with your team and with your work, a sense that you can challenge the status quo if you need to. You can suggest new, potentially controversial ideas. Or at the very least, you should be able to let your team know when something about your job or your work sucks and you're not having fun and you're not enjoying it. But as I mentioned earlier, many of us don't often find ourselves in situations like that. Late last year, there's a well-known management company in the United States called Gallup, and they did some research that showed that only 3 out of 10 workers actually believed or could strongly agree that their opinion mattered at work. 3 out of 10. That's an insanely low number, in my opinion. At best, that means we have 70% quieter offices. But at worst, it means that we are missing out on 70% of great ideas that could be changing our team, our community, and potentially the world for better through the use of what we develop. Now you might be lucky. Maybe you consider yourself one of those 3 in 10 workers who actually feels their opinion really matters. And if so, that's wonderful, and I'm happy for you. But it's in your best interest, actually, to be striving to build that type of environment for everyone else on your team as well. Gallup found that if you could increase the number of workers that strongly agreed their opinion mattered to 6 out of 10, you saw a bunch of benefits, such as fewer team members leaving, fewer incidents occurring, and an increase in productivity. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a win across the board for everyone to me. So sign me up for that. But with all this in mind, the question still remains, how do we actually do that? How do we build a team like this? Well, today I have 3 short stories that I want to share that will hopefully provide a framework for us to start thinking about what a team like this might look like. So my first software development job, we practiced code reviews. Now, being a super junior developer at the time, my contributions were often heavily scrutinized, which was totally fair. I was very bad at the time, and I learned a lot from this process. But unfortunately, each code review could take days, which meant that even for tiny changes, it would take me multiple days to land it into our code base. And so after this happened for a long time, I started to get really frustrated, right? It didn't feel like my contributions were valued by the team because they didn't seem to be a priority for anyone else. So what did I do? Well, I started to work more slowly. I slacked off more, and the result was no one really noticed. And so the lesson that I took from this is that this team wasn't safe for me from feeling worthless, from feeling like my work didn't really have meaning, that it was just kind of there as another body. And the result was poor productivity and lack of engagement with the office and the work that I was doing. Now, in this story, it would be really easy to say that the root issue here, the root cause, the thing that we should be focusing on fixing, was the code review process, and that it was flawed. And that may not necessarily be wrong, but I don't think it's the root problem. Oftentimes, when things go wrong, we want to point to something that's really easy to fix. And so what happens is we often fix a bunch of symptoms, and we wind up with a whole lot of processes, rules, and guidelines. But root frustrations for our developers and for our team are often still there. When it comes to building a great team, we need to make sure we're fixing those deep problems, those root frustrations. Right? We could have fixed the speed problem of the code reviews by mandating that every code review be done in a certain amount of time. And we could have written some code and some bots to help enforce those time limits. But what would have happened? Myself and the other junior developers on the team probably would have felt like we were just being a burden to those senior engineers on the team, right? Because we're now dictating what they're spending their time on. And that's not a healthy environment to be in. So that root frustration of being unsure if my contribution actually mattered would still be boiling just under the surface. So in this story, the real root problem here is that my team wasn't good at sharing encouragement and positive feedback. Now, ironically, to point that out to someone, you have to give them some negative feedback, but no one was willing to actually go that far. And so what happened is I had no signal that the work I was doing was good, but I had a pretty strong signal that my contributions weren't that valued. So the answer here is not more process. It rarely ever is. Oftentimes, we can solve technical problems through better process or improved workflows, but rarely does that actually help us with interpersonal problems. Right? Instead, we need to focus on fixing these sort of issues primarily by communicating better, communicating carefully. Apply some purpose, some empathy to how you communicate with your team. Maybe you see a junior developer, and they're struggling with the code review process. And so be sure to add some positive comments. Right? Let them know they're doing a good job, even if they're having lots of issues with the code they're submitting. Right? Or you interact with a team lead, and you see that they're really stressed out. Maybe let them know that your request wasn't that urgent. Or if you can, offer to take some of their workload off. The idea is that our communication, both in our team as well as the larger software engineering community we're in, should always have this constant purpose of trying to build a better environment. One where relationships are solid and people actually feel meaningfully connected to the work that they're doing. Imagine the impact these sorts of things would have on the open source community, right? Maybe new contributors would feel more welcomed and actually want to get involved more. And maintainers might not feel so overwhelmed and burn out as frequently. This idea of communicating carefully is really just a subset of a larger idea that I want to talk about, and that is mindfulness, which is this practice of paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Purposeful, non-judgmental attention to what is going on around you is very similar to what I was just talking about, right? But as you might guess from the definition that I just gave, it's a relatively broad subject. But at its core, mindfulness is simply about training yourself to really engage with what is going on around you, which is why it's often defined by practices like yoga or meditation. other very structured, very purposeful activities, right? But maybe you're like me, and you're like, nah, I don't know. Yoga and meditation, they seem a little new agey and unscientific. But there's been actually an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence coming out, scientific research, and tons of anecdotal evidence that these things actually tremendously improve your personal life, which translates into benefits and improvements in your professional life. So as a brief example, several years ago, the healthcare company Aetna started conducting mindfulness training with its employees. After roughly 13,000 of their employees took at least one session, they found some really compelling results. On average, they witnessed a 28% reduction in stress levels and a 20% improvement in their quality of sleep. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but there are definitely times where I could use better sleep and less stress in my life. And if doing so is going to benefit the rest of my team, then it's really a pretty compelling reason for me to at least give this a shot. So if you're interested in trying this out, I would recommend you start with this app called Headspace. It provides a really nice, low-commitment way to try out mindfulness meditation on your own time. You can build it into your life on your own time, in your own terms. And if you don't like it, it at least provides a really nice way to start a nap. So research has shown that developing mindfulness through things like Headspace actually enables us to be more mindful around other people. And when you start to be more mindful, it benefits your team because you engage in more meaningful ways. Right? We stop thinking about what we could be doing all the time, and instead we focus on what we actually are doing with our team. We put away our phones more to listen to people when they're actually talking to us. We close our laptops during meetings to give presenters our full attention. We show more interest. We've likely all had interactions where the other person was distracted, right? And what that conveys to you is whatever you're saying isn't that important. If it happens repeatedly, you start to internalize those feelings. No longer is it, the thing I'm talking about isn't important. It starts to become, I'm not important. And that's really dangerous if you're trying to build a cohesive, collaborative environment. So try to be mindful. Be purposeful. Practice empathy when you communicate. Applying these lessons to all spheres of software development is only going to make it much more inclusive and welcoming to everyone. Instead of the culture that many of us experience, which is filled with fear and insecurity. Fear, in particular, I think is a really compelling reason for us to strive towards building safe teams, because fear is a huge enemy of innovation and creativity. Which brings us to my next story. So on my second job, I got to work on an important piece of infrastructure for a very large application. Now, I was still relatively junior at the time, and so I solicited advice from senior engineers and even some design committees before deciding to move forward. When we moved forward, I was super proud of my work. These people I respected, these senior engineers, had said, this seems like a good idea, and that was wonderful. But when performance review time came around, it was a different story. There were some problems with the project, and they were ultimately used as justification to not give me a promotion. Now, obviously, that's a huge bummer, but the real frustrating part was that they had left comments stating that I had acted too independently, that I should have involved more senior engineers. But that's what I thought that I had done. And this experience led me to avoid responsibility in the future. I didn't want to take responsibility, be the point person, if all the blame for what I thought was a team decision was just going to come back on me. Eventually, due to that and some other reasons, I left the organization entirely. Now, as before, it would be easy to find a solution to this problem, right? You might say, oh, you should have got that promotion. But the promotion is just a distraction. The real problem here is that the reality of the work that I was doing wasn't getting properly communicated to the people that could make decisions about it. And what that told me is that this team wasn't safe for me to take risks on. I had to be careful about the work that I chose to pursue to make sure that perceptions wouldn't be skewed and that I would be reflected the way I wanted people to know me. And so this problem is known as impression management, which is this idea that you have to act a certain way to ensure a favorable perception of yourself for other people. Basically, you need to manipulate them in order to feel safe. We see this all the time in small ways, right? Maybe you don't ask that question in your team meeting because you don't want to look stupid. Or maybe you don't challenge that idea that you think is bad because that might hurt your chances of getting a promotion. Right? These sorts of behaviors are poison to building good collaborative teams. Because everyone's more worried about the impression that they're leaving than they are about the actual work that they're doing. And that's really at the heart of what is wrong in the story I just shared. No longer was I willing to take risks to be responsible because I was concerned about the impression I was going to leave. This sort of fear leads teams to stagnation and to potentially ruin. And it does it in much the same way as technical debt in your project does. When you have lots of tech debt in your project, as I'm sure many of us have experienced, especially because we work on CSS, it becomes difficult, or in some cases, impossible to make any sort of major changes. And even small ones become risky, right? In the very same way, when you have a culture of impression management and fear of openly sharing ideas with each other, it becomes difficult and in some cases truly impossible to enact any sort of lasting change. So how do we combat this? How do we combat this type of culture? Well, we have to strive in the opposite direction. To build a culture where you can show up and fully employ yourself in your work without being worried of negative consequences to your self-image, to your status, or even to your career. This type of environment is known as being a psychologically safe one, and it stands in direct contrast to that team where you have to be scared of the impression you're leaving. Psychologically safe teams, they feel comfortable taking interpersonal risks, which are things like suggesting new, potentially controversial ideas to solving problems, or actually acknowledging and owning up to your failures, but then actually learning from them. They're risks because you could find yourself in a position where you're embarrassed or maybe even actually punished for your actions by your team. The sort of team, though, where you can take these risks, give everyone a chance to contribute their voice to discussion. Right? They're cognizant of how they're interacting with one another and how it affects each other. And research from major players like Google and even Harvard has shown that these teams, they learn more quickly, they're more innovative, and they perform better overall. But how do we develop this, right? How do we get to a place where we're comfortable taking interpersonal risks with each other? The short answer is you have to start by experimenting and learning rapidly. Right? I like to think about interpersonal risks like software deployments. If you have an effective continuous deployment setup, then the impact of any one bad commit that goes out is usually small, right? If an issue occurs, you get feedback about it real quick, you make corrections, you deploy again. In a similar fashion, your team should have a methodology of continuously learning. Right? If someone makes a mistake, give them quick and timely feedback, you make corrections as needed, and you move forward. You don't dwell on issues unnecessarily, and you don't save feedback for a later date. Otherwise, that just begets a culture of scorekeeping, where everyone is unsure of who's tracking their every move. In my story, if I had received feedback as soon as someone noticed there was a problem, we could have dealt with it a lot more effectively, right? We could have learned from it. Instead, I only received the feedback as I was being denied a promotion. That doesn't communicate that there's an opportunity to learn. And it also doesn't communicate that there's safety in taking risks on your projects. All that it really communicates is that there are penalties for the actions that you have. So the critical point here is you have to give feedback. Feedback helps us build trust. It lets us avoid additional process. And it develops better working relationships between the people that are involved in it. And we can use those pieces to help us inform our future decisions, to learn faster and be better as individuals, as a team, and as a whole community. So give feedback. Give it early, give it transparently, and give it often to each other. Learn rapidly from your failures. Don't be afraid of that. And be courageous. You have to be courageous to step out to try to build this culture in your workplace. Now, there's one last point to hit on in this realm of taking risks. How do you generate effective feedback? Because as we've seen, it's really easy for us to oversimplify solutions to problems or identify the wrong problem. So I'm a big fan of this model called the 5 whys. The idea is simple. When you're presented with a problem, you repeatedly ask the question, why? Why is this happening? Why did that happen? Until you reach an actual root cause that you should fix. So as a brief example, let's consider the scenario where I push some broken CSS to production. Maybe our site looks like this. My product manager comes over and says, "Why does the site look weird?" Well, I pushed some bad CSS. Why did you push bad CSS? Well, we didn't test it thoroughly. Why didn't we test it thoroughly? Well, we needed to ship to hit the deadline. Why didn't the deadline include time to properly QA it, to test it? We didn't include it in the estimate. Why didn't we include it in the estimate? Well, we didn't consider it to be part of delivering a feature. Maybe we should change that. Right? If we had stopped after the first question here, all the blame would have just been placed on my shoulders and we would have been done with it. And that leaves developers feeling unsafe in their position. And that's often what we do, unfortunately, because we want the easy fix, the quick fix. So the 5 whys approach here has this direct benefit of letting you identify deep issues in your culture, the way you approach working. But it also lets you build a safe team where people can take smart risks. Because mistakes get treated as gaps in your tooling or your training or your technology, not necessarily as personal failures, which makes it safe for you to take those smart risks. There are 2 quotes that I think really hammer home this point. The first is that you must never place a worker only one defense away from failure. And the reason for this is because people aren't really afraid of failure, they're afraid of being blamed. Right? We're all going to fail at some point. It's human nature. Some of us, like myself, might even fail multiple times in a single day on occasion. Accidents and mistakes, they happen. But if you spend every moment of your job and your life worrying about that, you're just never going to do anything super noteworthy. And that is one unique reason why psychological safety is so important for those of us involved in a creative, technological industry. It's because it lets us take risks with the technology, with the tools that we are using. See, psychological safety is vital for us to avoid stagnation, to innovate. Having a safe team, it makes it easier for you to adopt new frameworks, to try out new programming paradigms like we'll hear about today, and adapt to the ever-shifting world of best practices, which we'll also hear about today. And those aspects are really just focused on keeping up, right? If you want to be in a position where your team can actually innovate, push the whole industry forward, then you'll need to take even bigger risks and potentially wind up in a place where your immediate team, the people you work with, are the only ones that can truly help you out. If you're not in a psychologically safe team, then those initiatives either never get off the ground, or when they do, they quickly lead you to burnout. Which brings us to my final story here. I was in a role where I got to work more or less independently. I had a senior title and a proven track record of being a good developer. And it seemed like a wonderful role. I was really excited about it, but I found that I was unhappy. Right? I wasn't getting to work closely with others, which meant I wasn't getting feedback. I couldn't tell if I was growing. And when work started to pile up, which is bound to happen from time to time, there's no one I could really talk to about it. Which really sucks, because I'm a developer, right? And so I like to complain about things. Eventually, I started to feel burnt out. I wanted to quit. I needed help. Now I get that it's the dream of many developers to get to work independently and autonomously on projects that interest you. But as I've experienced firsthand, there's a lot of risk in doing this. If you don't have a good support system in place, then it's real easy for independence to just feel like isolation. And when work begins to pile up, you're going to feel like you're shouldering this gigantic burden all on your own. And you can't just shrug that off or ignore it. There's this unfortunate vicious cycle that engages for many developers, right? We get stressed out by work, but we feel it's the amount of work that's causing the stress. So because we're smart and because we think we're very efficient developers, we just work harder. We do more work, and we build more stress, thinking that it's actually paying it down, but it doesn't. And so this cycle will continue until eventually you burn out and crash, or someone close to you recognizes it and points it out to you. So the issue in my story was a lack of transparency into what was going on. And this resulted in my not realizing the trend that was forming in my life. And my team was also unaware. Now, before moving into talking about how we prevent this, I want to hit on real briefly what burnout and work fatigue actually mean for those of us in this industry. Because we talk about those terms a lot, and I think they've lost their meaning for some folks. right? Burnout is a serious issue. It's a state of chronic stress that leads you to physical and emotional exhaustion. And it makes you cynical and detached, not just in your work, but in everything in your life. It'll make you feel ineffective, unaccomplished, despite any evidence you might see to the contrary. And you likely won't recognize it until it gets really bad. As software developers, or those of us in this industry, we're very susceptible to this sort of ailment, right? Because we're hyper-connected. It's really easy for us to stay connected to our work all the time. And since it's a creative pursuit, we often feel a personal attachment, maybe even obligation to our work. And since many of us are passionate about it, we write code in our spare time. That just contributes even more. And as I mentioned earlier, our industry is constantly evolving, so you have to be constantly learning, and that's a lot of pressure. So what do we do? How do we combat this when it seems like the deck is stacked against us? Well, I actually believe the answer from a team perspective is a combination of the two traits we talked about earlier: psychological safety and mindfulness, right? They form a virtuous cycle that combats that vicious cycle I mentioned earlier. Now, that idea might be a bit abstract, so let's talk about some simple examples that you can try out. First idea, non-judgmentally, track participation from the rest of your team. Right? Make mental, physical notes even of who is engaging in your meetings and who isn't. Who seems to be engaged with the team and who's not. Who's speaking up. This forces you to be present, to be mindful of what's going on in your team. And when you recognize that someone isn't engaged, you can follow up with them, which will help them feel valued and feel, well, like they're actually part of a team. Another easy idea is to simply incorporate and acknowledge what other people are saying. This doesn't mean repeat what they said word for word, but try to incorporate aspects of what they say in your responses. Maybe something like, hey, Sue had a really great idea about Z the other day. We should make sure that we incorporate that. Again, this forces you to be present, to be mindful of what's going on. And in turn, it allows your coworkers to feel genuinely heard and valued. Now, these little tweaks, they probably don't seem like much, but they can have a profound impact on your team's dynamics over the long haul. But in addition to these little tweaks, we also really need to ensure that we're focusing on taking care of ourselves as well. To that end, I want to talk about this idea of emotional fitness, which is simply the idea that your emotional and mental health needs to be looked after in much the same way as your physical health does. You can't do nothing and expect to be emotionally strong. Right? And this impacts your whole life, including your team at work. Think about the last time you got stressed out. Did you withdraw from your work? Or maybe the last time life threw you a curveball. Did you handle it in a way that you were proud of? Or, like me maybe, did you start getting frustrated more easily and lash out at your coworkers on occasion? Right, these are the sorts of things that show whether we're emotionally fit or not. And most of us, myself included, need a lot of improvement. But how do we become emotionally fit? Well, I would first recommend you check out some talks from Dr. Emily Anhalt. She's given some really excellent presentations on this subject. But for now, I want to recommend one really easy thing you can do, which is simply find a couple hours a week to play. And what I mean by play is engage in something purely for enjoyment rather than any practical purpose. Right? Maybe put together a puzzle with a loved one. Start writing that fanfic finally. Or pick up an old hobby. Right? And probably step away from the computer for a little while. Right? It's easy for us to think we're relaxing when really we're still working in some capacity. Right? Which is why I say that we need to play, and not that we need to relax. Playing has been found to reduce stress. It builds better relationships between those involved in it, and it enables you to respond better when things go wrong. Now, if you're unsure how to tell if you're actually engaged in a playful activity, there's a simple litmus test you can use, which is inspired by this quote from Niall Horan, who's a member of the boy band One Direction, actually. He once said when someone asked him why he wanted to play the guitar more, "Someone told me the smile on my face gets bigger when I play the guitar." So my question for you all today is, what makes you smile more? Find that and do it. Try to do it for at least a couple hours a week. Now, obviously, don't turn it into an obligation, but it will be tremendously beneficial. Becoming emotionally fit is an ongoing process, ongoing commitment, but it's one that's going to help us build a safe work culture for ourselves and those around us. And it's going to help you improve your overall quality of life as well. And to that end, I want to encourage you all to model the behavior you want to see in your team, right? On one of my first days at Netflix, my officer came up to me and said, "Hey, you've been here about 8 hours. You should go home." It was a really small act, but But it was very intentional. And what it communicated to me through both his actions and his words was that I wasn't expected to work long hours, that I was expected to take care of myself. We need to take care of ourselves. And if you're in a position of leadership or as someone that others look up to, make sure you're intentional about setting that example. I think doing these things will go a long way towards combating burnout in our industry. We work in a very creative, a very exciting field, right? That offers plenty of rewarding opportunities. But as software becomes a more and more important part of our society, chances are working conditions will get worse for many of us. Because most modern ideas about how to scale businesses are geared at repeatedly solving the same problems through process, which is against this idea of being creative and being innovative. So we have to respond to this by building safe teams. We must be intentional about the type of culture we want our team and our environment, our community to have, which I believe should be one of safety. Right, at this point, we've looked at some personal examples from my life, some studies, and even a few tips of how to build safe teams. And I hope that all of you walk out of here at the end of today, and as you're hearing the other talks, thinking about these ideas. But under all these thoughts I've shared, really my strongest motivating factor is that we just should focus on making people awesome. People like you all, people like me, people like everyone that we work with, all have the ability to be awesome if they're put in the right environment to grow and to thrive. And I believe for the vast majority of people, that is one of safety and security, one where they can take risks confidently, where they feel their contributions matter, and they're encouraged to focus on both their physical and mental health. So if we want to make people awesome, then it's only reasonable that we make safety a requirement, right? In the same way that we make tests a requirement for our products so that we can confidently ship them, we need to make safety a requirement for our teams so that we can confidently grow our people. There's a well-known quote that says, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the people to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. Similarly, I would say if you want to build a great team, don't drum up people to just share their feelings, conduct trainings, and implement new processes. We have to teach ourselves, teach others, to really yearn for the vast and untapped potential of everyone around us. Thank you.